Hi guys, welcome to this week's lecture. We're going to be talking about patterns of evolution and speciation. So as always, here are our objectives and our vocabulary for the week. So the objectives are explain how changes in the environment may result in a new species or the extinction of a species, define a species and use binomial nomenclature, and explain the three different patterns of evolution. The vocab, as always, is on Quizlet. All right, so first we have to start with asking how do we get different species? Like how does that happen? All right, so what happens is the organisms must first become separated in some way, and then evolution has to occur by natural selection because the organisms are now in different environments due to that separation, right? So the natural selection occurs and the organisms become more and more specialized for their environment. All right, so first isolation must occur. So geographic isolation is the first type of isolation that can occur. This is when two populations are separated by a geographic barrier. So by something like physical in the environment, such as a river, a mountain, a body of water. If it's something small like ants, let's say like a giant puddle, right, that doesn't dry up, there just has to be some way that they're separate from each other. Okay. Another type of isolation is behavioral isolation. This is when two populations live in the same area, but they've developed different courtship rituals, so different ways to attract a mate. So this also goes along with non-random mating. So they're not mating randomly with each other, right? They're choosing somebody, but they're choosing different things, right? And because those courtship rituals or those behaviors are different, it prevents them from breeding. So like this, I'd really love if you'd swim across to me, right? That's geographic isolation. And then, gross country, that's behavioral isolation. Our third type of isolation is temporal isolation. And when you see temporal, I want you to think time. This is when two organisms in the same species are going to reproduce at different times. Because they have different mating seasons, they're not going to mate with each other, which causes that isolation. This is the last one, right? Wake up, it's time to release your pollen. Come on, I like those. All right, so there are patterns of evolution or ways evolution will occur. The first one is coevolution, second convergent evolution, and then divergent evolution. So coevolution is when closely interacting species are going to put selective pressure on each other. Look at the picture back there, right? It's got a bird and a flower. Now, that bird pollinates that flower. Look at how the shape of the beak mimics the shape of the flower, right? So as the flower changed, the birds with beaks that were more shaped to the flower could get more food and then could have more offspring and passed on that trait of the beneficial beak to their offspring. Does that make sense? That's coevolution. All right. Same thing happens with predators and prey. As the bunnies get faster, the faster coyotes catch the bunnies, right? The slower coyotes don't get enough food, so they're not going to pass that trait on. The faster bunnies, so it's like this. It's a graph, like so. I don't have the pen, but so the bunnies get faster, and then the coyotes get faster. They follow behind, and then they end up going back down, and then they go back down. So it goes back and forth, and we'll see a couple graphs like that this week. All right, so these organisms are going to evolve together and cause each other to evolve. Convergent evolution, all right, is a process where species that aren't related at all are going to evolve to have very similar traits, okay? But keep in mind, they are not related. This occurs because these species are going to live in the same environment, right? So think of things that live in the air. Ooh, my lights just went out. If you live in the air, you need wings to fly, right? Here's examples here, okay? So you have 3 different organisms here. I'm going to see if I can write with my mouse. So I've got a pterodactyl, right? And it's over here too, a pterodactyl, right? A bat, which is right here, and then the bat over here, and then I have a bird and a bird. Look at their structures of their bones, okay? See how different they are? The pterodactyl has like a really long, like, finger, pretty much, and that's what the wing attaches to. The bat has 4 long fingers that its wing attaches to, and the bird doesn't have any fingers, actually. It's the bird's whole arm, and it doesn't actually even have fingers, right? So similar, but not related. Those structures are not the same. So this is going to be convergent evolution. All right, so those traits, because they're not the same, they're considered analogous traits. Convergent evolution, you start different, right? And you come together to look the same. That's what we have to think about. Start different and come together. They're going to have analogous traits, and analogous traits look alike. So A for analogous, A for alike. Convergent evolution, start different and come together, CC. Okay, so those traits are analogous traits because they're not actually the same. They all look like they look the same. They all have wings, but their wings are very different. So they're going to be analogous traits. And then divergent evolution, okay, is when you start the same and you become different. You diverge, start the same, become different. D. This is two or more related populations that become different because they live in different habitats. All right, this is all environmental. This is like environment is going to fuel all this for happening. So since they share a common ancestor, their traits are going to be homologous. They'll have the same bone structures underneath, right? They'll have the same base. But that base changed slightly, or the base was the same and then the organisms changed as they diverged and became different. So like all of these organisms here, we have big toes on all of these primate feet, right? But they look different, okay? So in divergent evolution, the structure is going to look different, even though they have the same basic parts, all right? So convergent evolution, they come together and their structures look alike, but the basic parts are different. Divergent evolution, they become different. The structures don't look alike, and the basic parts are the same. They just changed because they became different, right? So divergent, homologous traits, convergent, analogous traits. So there are two types of convergent evolution. There's adaptive radiation and artificial selection. So adaptive radiation is when many species come from one single ancestral species. So they diverge or separate in response to different habitats, all right? So if you have like an organism that goes to a new ecosystem, it goes to a new island and there's nothing on there, right? All of the habitats are open so the organism can take part of all of those places, but they all have slightly different environmental pressures. All right, so a mutation allows species to survive in an environment that they were unable to survive in before is also another way that divergent evolution can occur. So like, let's say, I don't know, there was a mutation that let us breathe underwater. Well, now the people who have the mutation can go into the ocean. So now they have a new ecosystem, right? Because that mutation allowed it. So either you take the organism and move it to a new ecosystem that doesn't have a lot of stuff, or a mutation occurs in their body that gives them access to new ecosystems. And both of those cause species to diverge, which is adaptive radiation, where one organism gets a whole bunch. Think of Darwin's finches. All right, and then artificial selection is a type of divergence, but it's due to human intervention. Okay, so animals and organisms that are bred for specific traits, like dogs. Throughout history, we've bred dogs for specific things, like terriers usually are little, and like rat terriers and stuff like that, they go into holes and dig out things, right? Hounds are gonna find stuff. They just have different traits that we breed them for. All right. Last thing on this is naming species. So we just talked about how different species are created. Now let's keep in mind a species is a group of organisms that can breed and have fertile offspring. So organisms that have the same species are going to have the same scientific name. So when we name them like Homo sapien, people, everybody who's a Homo sapien is the same species. They could breed and have fertile offspring. Okay, all of these organisms here, right? These do not have the same scientific name. They have different scientific names. So they're different species. All right. So naming, when we use a scientific name, what it is a two-part name, and it uses binomial nomenclature, right? That's a two-word naming system. The first word is their genus. So this word, Vulpes, is the genus, right? It's capitalized. The second word, this one, is the species name. Okay, so it's a genus and a species. The genus can be the same, right? The species are different. And then if we look here, see how we have Canis lupus and Canis lupus familiaris, right? This is genus, species, right? But this guy, the dog, he has familiaris listed after him. He's a subspecies, okay? What that means is those organisms can actually reproduce and have fertile offsprings. Dog and wolf can, right? But they don't usually. Whereas like a dog and coyote is not going to reproduce, right? A dog and a wolf actually can. They're just not going to, most likely. It's just not common, all right? So that makes it a subspecies. So that means they're genetically different, but will at times interbreed all on their own without human intervention.